Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar. We are just waiting a minute as people join in, and then we'll be getting started. All right, so I think everyone's filtering in here. Just wait another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. But as I can see, people are putting in the chat where they're joining from, which is fantastic. If you want to put where you're joining from, if you're representing any organizations, where you are, that's always great to see as we're in this kind of global setting on online here. It's wonderful to see where people are joining from. And just before we get started, we will have a question and answer period at the end, so we won't be taking hands up. If you have questions and answers, we should have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen where you can enter in any questions you have that we'll address at the end of our speakers. So I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone tonight to our webinar, U.S. Canada Hands Off Venezuela, U.S. Imperialist Attacks versus Venezuela's Self-Determination, Sovereignty, and Global Solidarity. Very happy to be holding this webinar today with such a fantastic panel of speakers. I think this is really a critical time, of course, as we all know, to discuss Venezuela. My name, first of all, is Janine Solanki. I'm on the coordinating committee of the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that as I'm speaking to you all from Vancouver, I'm on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And I know many of us are joining from across Canada and other parts of the world. So if you are residing on Indigenous territories, I hope you take a moment to reflect on the responsibility we each have to Indigenous nations to recognize, respect, and support their historic and inalienable rights, especially the rights to self-determination. Also, as we are keeping the chat open for Q&A and the Q&A period later, I want to remind everyone that we're open to constructive dialogue and discussion, but that any disrespectful, disruptive comments will not be tolerated. And if someone is just disrupting the chat, they will be removed. But I do, as I said, encourage people to share in the chat where you're joining from. It's always great to see where everyone is dialing in from. So for our webinar tonight, U.S.-Canada Hands Off Venezuela, U.S. Imperialist Attacks versus Venezuela's Self-Determination, Sovereignty, and Global Solidarity. This is organized, first of all, by the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, which is a network of over 55 member groups across Canada. that are coming together, working together against war, against occupations, against sanction campaigns and military aggressions, of course with a particular focus on how the role that Canada plays in wars and occupations, and in particular protesting and organizing against Canada's participation in NATO. I encourage you to check out our website, to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, Medium, and YouTube, and I'll be posting some links in the chat. And if you're part of an organization, a peace, social justice, anti-war, climate justice group in Canada, and would like to join the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, I will also put more information in the chat on how you can join our network. So the idea for this webinar actually came several months ago. We started planning and intending to have this webinar in response to the escalations of the United States against Venezuela, in particular the US bombing attacks on Venezuelan boats that have killed at least 115 people, and as well this not being anything new, this coming after 11 years of deadly US sanctions against Venezuela, after Canada's sanctions against Venezuela, and a long history of US threats against Venezuela. But then we saw in the early hours of January 3rd, the US Trump administration launched the brutal bombing attack on Venezuela, killing more than 100 people. And in a blatant violation of international law, US forces abducted Venezuelan President Maduro and his wife and first combatant Cilia Flores, who are now being illegally held in the United States. So of course, this webinar itself became a more urgent topic for us to join together and discuss, and also the urgent need for mass mobilizations, which have erupted across Venezuela, demanding the return of Venezuela's democratically elected President Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores. And in the first few days after this attack, the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network immediately issued a call to action on January 3rd and had 13 cities answer that call across Canada with protests and all sorts of actions demanding no war on Venezuela, hands off Venezuela, and for the reinstatement and return of President Maduro and Cilia Flores. Those actions are continuing, of course, across Canada, the US, Venezuela, of course, and worldwide, as peace-loving people, justice-minded people are calling for an end to the attacks on Venezuela and for the rightful return of Venezuela's president. So tonight we have a very important chance to discuss Venezuela's struggle for self-determination against US imperialist attack and the role of the anti-war movement in defending Venezuela. We have an excellent panel of speakers. Andreina Chavez Alava, who is a Venezuelan journalist based in Caracas, Venezuela. Maria Paez Victor, who is a Venezuelan-born sociologist based in Toronto, Canada. Camila Escalante, who is a journalist and co-founder and editor of Kawachan News. And Alison Bodine, who is a social justice activist and author based in Vancouver and founding member of the Venezuela Solidarity Network. So without further ado, we're going to start out with Andreina Chavez Alava, who, as I said, is a Venezuelan journalist based in Caracas, Venezuela, who's calling in directly from Venezuela, from Caracas, and has been reporting about Venezuela's struggle against US imperialism for over a decade. But before I hand over the virtual mic to her, I believe we have just a short video we can show of one of her interviews in Venezuela. So we'll switch to that just now before we hand over the mic to her.
Cilia Pérez, soy de la comuna gigante Cacique Ciudad, del territorio San Pedro de Caracas. Estamos aquí haciendo presencia, exigiendo que nos regresen a nuestro presidente y a nuestra diputada Cilia Flores, que fueron secuestrados por los Estados Unidos en su maniobra imperialista. Pero además decirle al mundo que las comunas y los comuneros y comuneras de este país estamos dispuestos a hacer la lucha en cualquiera que sean los escenarios para defender la patria, para defender el futuro, porque estamos haciendo la construcción de un nuevo Estado comunal en este rompimiento de la historia que ha hecho Venezuela una vez más. Nosotros hacemos un llamado a todos, a que se movilicen, a que nada nos desmoralice, porque nosotros somos venezolanas y venezolanos que vamos construyendo esta patria desde la base, desde los territorios, conscientes de que podemos tener una nueva victoria como la que hemos construido desde el comandante Chávez.
Orángel Vera, de Maracaibo, Estado Zulia, de la comuna Juana de Ávila Sur y Norte. Estamos aquí presentes para exigir a los norteamericanos que se llevaron a nuestro presidente, a nuestra primera dama, que regresen y que devuelvan al presidente Nicolás Maduro Moro. Toda la juventud comunera está apoyando a nuestro presidente y aquí estamos hoy pateando las calles, como dijo el presidente y comandante Hugo Rafael Chávez Frías.
Mi nombre es Rocío Rodríguez, comunera del municipio Sucre, del estado bolivariano de Miranda, de nuestra patria Venezuela. Estamos aquí rechazando contundentemente los ataques por el imperio norteamericano de Trump, el cual secuestró en un delito de guerra a nuestro presidente Nicolás Maduro Moro, presidente electo por el pueblo, y de nuestra primera dama y diputada Cilia Flores, del cual denunciamos los ataques contra nuestra patria, contra varios estados, contra nuestros compañeros civiles y militares que murieron por arbitrariamente secuestrar al presidente. Rechazamos todos estos ataques ante el mundo. Nosotros somos un pueblo soberano, libre, tenemos derecho a la autodeterminación. Hacemos un llamado y denunciamos todo lo que está pasando en nuestra patria Venezuela, que puede pasar en cualquier país del mundo, porque Donald Trump se cree un Hitler, se cree el dueño del mundo, y ya basta. No queremos una tercera guerra mundial, queremos paz porque somos un país, Latinoamérica y el Caribe, zona de paz. Ya basta, y solicitamos, exigimos al mundo entero, a la ONU, a la Corte Suprema Internacional de Justicia, que interceda ante este ataque unilateral por Trump. Basta ya. Y viva las mujeres, viva Cilia, viva nuestro presidente, viva el pueblo de Venezuela.
Wow, I think that is a perfect way to start our webinar, and I'll pass the mic over to you, Andreina.
Thank you, Janine, and thank you everyone for inviting me. I hope you can hear me okay. And thank you for showing those videos. Those are videos that I recorded. I think it was January 9, like the 5th day of daily rallies in Venezuela. That was a rally that was being held by the communal movement. All communes in Venezuela mobilized that day across the country to reject the violation of Venezuelan sovereignty, to demand the return of President Nicolás Maduro, to denounce in front of the entire world that what Trump just did against Venezuela can happen against anybody else in Latin America or any other place. And the three clips that you just saw, the three people that you just heard speaking, in case you weren't able to understand what they were saying or couldn't read the captions, they all basically said the same things. The first is that we demand the return of President Nicolás Maduro. He is the elected constitutional president of Venezuela, and he was kidnapped by the United States. He was not arrested or captured like mainstream media has been saying. This is a kidnapping. They are saying that Venezuela is going to continue to defend its sovereignty, is going to continue to defend the project that we have been building since Hugo Chavez came to power in 1998. And finally, they are saying that Venezuela is going to continue to denounce what is happening every day in the streets, a constant mobilization. because we know that the only way to fight any battles or to win any battles is by one, preserving peace in the country, and second, to make sure that we are always mobilized, we're always in the streets, we're always making sure that even if mainstream media doesn't want to tell our story, even if mainstream media doesn't want to take pictures of the massive rallies that are happening in Caracas and across Venezuela, we're going to make sure that we continue to do that. Because at some point it's going to be inevitable to realize that Venezuela is a country that is at peace, is a country that supports its government, and that what mainstream media has been saying, that we were living in a dictatorship and that the Venezuelan people are going to be happy and relieved that they kidnapped the president, it's not true. So I think we all know what happened already on January 3rd. We know that we were the victims of a brutal military attack by the United States. I live in Caracas. I live in the center of Caracas, so I was able to hear and experience the entire thing firsthand. And what happened in Venezuela, what happened that day, it was not only a violation of sovereignty, but it was a terrorist attack. It felt like a terrorist attack. We felt terrorized by the United States. And of course, we know now that at least 100 people died. Many of them are civilian people. We have now already names of some of the civilian people that died. I've been able to speak to some of the communities that were most affected by the U.S. bombings. And so I know that the community in Catia La Mar, which is La Guaira state, that is north of Caracas, they were hit by U.S. bomb. It was a 16-apartment building. 8 apartments were destroyed by the U.S. bombings. This is a building that was also habitated only by elderly people. One woman, an 80-year-old woman named Rosa Gonzalez, died because of the U.S. bombing. Her brother lost his house. He had been living there since 1969, and his apartment was destroyed on January 3rd when a bomb fell on his building. We also know that right now that community is grieving everything they lost, but they have begun already rebuilding everything that was destroyed that day. We have seen a union between the community, between local authorities, between workers, between the military. They're all helping rebuild this building that was destroyed, and just giving attention, social attention to this community, so they are able to move forward from this trauma. We also know about a woman, a Colombian national, 45-year-old woman named Joanna, who also died because she was sleeping in her house in El Latillo, which is also very near to Caracas, that is Miranda State. And a U.S. bomb fell very near her house. The bomb was supposedly targeting a communication antenna, and it happened to fall in a rural community, and Joanna was killed because of the U.S. bombings. And I'm mentioning these names, I'm mentioning these stories because there has been this repetition in mainstream media that the U.S. bombings were very surgical, that they were very direct, that they only targeted military sites and government sites, and that is not true. That is so far from the truth. We are still trying to understand the magnitude of all the damage, of all the destruction that was caused. I know that there's people in Fortuna, which is where President Maduro was kidnapped. And for those who don't know, Fortuna is not only a military complex, it is also a civilian residential area. There are many buildings there with normal people, civilian people, who just happen to live near a military complex, because Venezuela has never felt the need to separate military from civilians. We have a seated military union. Many of the families who live in Fortuna are the families of the military, and they were also affected by these U.S. bombings. There are craters in the ground. There's people who suffer many damages in their apartments. And all of this is still happening. We're still recovering from this terrorist attack by the United States. Hopefully, at some point, we will have a very detailed account of everything that happened. I think, of course, Venezuelan authorities are being very careful, because these are not just any kind of thefts or destruction. These are people who were victims of war crimes, and they need to be treated as such. So I'm mentioning that because I always want to make sure that people understand that Venezuela suffer, everyone in Venezuela, the civilian population, the military population, we all suffer a criminal military attack. Second, we know that President Maduro was kidnapped on January 3rd. We know that the charges that are being pressed against President Maduro are completely made up. And now that he is already in prison in the United States, now we are seeing many articles by the New York Times and other outlets saying what we have been saying for years, that the Cartel de los Soles, the so-called cartel that Maduro was the leader of, never existed. We now see that they are openly admitting that Maduro was never linked to the Tren de Aragua criminal gang. We are seeing that they are admitting that Venezuela is not a drug producing country. There's no proof that Venezuela produces any kind of cocaine, and there's no proof that Venezuela produces fentanyl. And any transit, any drug trafficking that happens within Venezuelan borders is so insignificant that it doesn't really even account for Venezuela is not a major player in the global drug trafficking. And we are seeing all of this information now being admitted very quietly by mainstream media, by the US Justice Department, because they don't care. They know that they already used this narrative for what they wanted, which was to bomb Venezuela and to be able to kidnap President Maduro. And they don't care now to admit that those things were never real. The damage has already been done. But one thing that I believe it is very important is that since the bombing, since the kidnapping of President Maduro, a lot of things have become very clear for a lot of people. One of them is the idea that Venezuela was a dictatorship. And now we are seeing that every day in the streets, people are going out, marching, rallying in defense of President Maduro, in defense of the Bolivarian process, in defense of acting President Delcy Rodriguez. So the whole idea that somehow President Maduro was a dictator, that he didn't win the elections in 2024, that people didn't want him there, that people were going to be happy that he would be ousted from power. It has now become very clear to anybody who has eyes, to anybody who wants to see the truth about Venezuela. It has become very clear that that wasn't true. Everything we're seeing right now in the country, it is a mobilized people, organized communities, organized popular power who are demanding the return of President Maduro. In fact, something that has become very peculiar to me is that in many of the interviews that I have been doing with people who are in the streets rallying, all of them tell me President Maduro is an elected president. I voted for him. I voted for President Maduro to be the head of the government. So how come the United States gets to decide that they need to take him out? And that reminded me in 2002 when President Hugo Chavez was briefly ousted by a US-backed coup. There were people in the streets saying the exact same thing. And there was a woman who became it became an iconic moment for Venezuela, for Venezuelan history, because she went on television, she was on the streets, and she was recorded on television saying, I voted for Chavez. What am I supposed to do with my vote? I mean, why does someone else get to decide that someone that I elected and that the people elected can no longer be president? And the same thing is happening now. People in the streets are saying the same thing. I elected Maduro. I voted for him. How come a foreign power can decide whether or not he can be president? And on top of that, kidnap him and try to attempt to force these incredible bogus charges against him. And I think that's the moment when I think to myself, I hope that at least now everybody can understand that the US has always been lying about Venezuela. They lied about Venezuela being a dictatorship. They lied about Venezuela being a narco-trafficking country with a narco-trafficking government. That they lie about wanting democracy and freedom for Venezuela. Right after President Maduro was kidnapped, the very same morning, President Donald Trump and his closest officials, they gave a press conference And I listened to the entire thing, and not once did they mention democracy. Not once did they mention the word democracy. But they mentioned the word oil at least a dozen times, if not more. Everything they said that day was, from now on, we're going to run Venezuela. We're going to take charge of all of the oil that Venezuela has. We're going to manage Venezuela's oil industry. We're going to take the oil of Venezuela. We're going to extract an immense amount of wealth from Venezuelan ground. And that was the whole point, and that was always the point. President Hugo Chavez denounced that the U.S. government was after Venezuela's oil. President Maduro denounced that the entire aggression against Venezuela had as an ultimate goal to take Venezuela's oil. On top of that, we have the fact that the United States imposed sanctions against Venezuela since 2017, sanctions against the oil industry. To put it in so you understand it better. So in 2017, the U.S. Treasury Department imposed financial sanctions against Venezuela's state oil company PDVSA. That meant that PDVSA, which is the Venezuela's oil company that is in charge of commercializing Venezuelan oil, that company, they couldn't access the international financial system, they couldn't make payments, they couldn't receive payments. In 2019, the first Trump administration also imposed an oil embargo, which is an oil blockade, which basically meant that all foreign companies that were working in Venezuela, that were operating in Venezuela, such as Chevron, Halliburton, ExxonMobil, many others, they had to leave Venezuela because the oil blockade against Venezuela imposed in 2019 forced all foreign companies to leave Venezuela. So they had to leave because the Trump administration told them that they needed to do that. Very recently, when Trump met with all the representatives, all the directors of these oil companies, there was a very, for me, it was like a funny moment because he was talking with this guy, I think he was the director of Halliburton, and he was asking, oh, when did you have to leave Venezuela? Thinking that he was going to say, oh, I was kicked from Venezuela, from the Venezuelan government kicked me out and stole everything that I had. And they were, oh, we left in 2019 because you imposed an oil embargo and told us that we needed to leave. And that was like a moment in which that is the one thing that I appreciate about all of this is all of these moments of clarity, all the realizations that Venezuela was having an economic crisis, had a severe humanitarian conditions because we couldn't sell oil because the U.S. blockaded our oil industry because they wanted to starve the population, they wanted to cause economic asphyxiation, and they did for many years since 2017. And we face incredibly difficult circumstances as Venezuelans. This was all recorded, by the way, by a United Nations expert. Her name is Alina Duhan. She came to Venezuela in 2021. I think it was in March 2021. And she was able to guarantee that what happened in Venezuela was, in fact, the result of US sanctions. So there is like ample documentation, international experts that have been able to come to Venezuela and assess that Venezuela couldn't sell oil because the United States prohibited Venezuela from selling its own oil, and that caused the economic crisis that we suffered for many years. And now the Trump administration, what is he doing? He's trying to impose this narrative that, oh, because we kidnapped Maduro, now Venezuela is finally selling oil, and now they're going to finally be able to do this right because we are the ones who are going to be in charge. No, what he's doing is simply lifting sanctions. He's simply now ignoring all the sanctions that he imposed himself on the oil industry to be able to take the oil that the companies in the United States have always wanted. And that is what is happening. And of course, right now, what many people have been asking, okay, but isn't this like, I don't know, it isn't, I don't know, I suppose people are confused by the fact that acting President Delcy Rodriguez is talking with the Trump administration, they are negotiating, and that is inevitable. we are we are against an opponent that has kept international law and that has demonstrated that they have absolutely no problem bombing another country and killing people. And when you're facing that, your only option is diplomacy. The only option that you have is to try to negotiate. On top of that, they have President Maduro and his wife. They are kidnapped. And the way we are dealing with the United States, it is in the way any person who has to deal with the kidnapper of a family member. So we have to negotiate. We have to make these oil deals. We have to try to make sure that we preserve peace in Venezuela, because as we know, Trump has threatened that if Delcy or the Venezuelan government doesn't do what he says, he's going to bomb Venezuela again. So of course, Delcy Rodriguez has said it herself that the main priority is to maintain peace, is to make sure that we don't suffer another illegal criminal aggression. The second priority of her government, it is to secure the liberation of President Maduro and his wife. And the third priority is to preserve political power. And that is the part that I think is so important to understand. Venezuela still has a Bolivarian government. President Delcy Rodriguez and the entire military, judicial, and leadership in Venezuela, they are all part of the Bolivarian government. They have all pledged support for President Delcy Rodriguez. The Bolivarian process is still in power. And I think that's something so important to understand right now, because in the face of U.S. aggression, uh, the best thing that Venezuela can do is to preserve power, is to make sure that people know that it is possible to continue our political project, even though we are facing incredible coercion and threats by a nuclear power. So I don't want to extend much longer, because I know there are other speakers, but I can answer questions at the end of the webinar.
Thank you very much. It's so wonderful to have your insights and experience direct from Venezuela. And just a reminder for people who are looking forward to the question and answer period, we won't be taking raised hands, but you can look at the bottom of your screen and you should have a Q&A box where you can put questions and type in questions that I'll read out after the speakers during the discussion period. So thanks once again, Andreina, and I'm going to go on to our next speaker, Maria Paez Victor, who is a Venezuelan-born sociologist based in Toronto, Canada. For several years, she taught the sociology of health and medicine, as well as health and environmental policies at the University of Toronto. She founded the Louis Riel Bolivarian Circle in 2003, and they are still continuing to fight for Venezuela. So thank you so much for joining us, Maria, and I'll pass the mic over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I am really honored. Well, I think that Andreina said practically what I was going to say, and also the lady, I loved your videos. One of the last lady that spoke, I think she said everything that I wanted to say. One of the things that I love listening to my people is that the Venezuelan people, through 25 years of struggle, have such political savvy, such ability of analysis of politics. They really have what Paulo Freire talked about, which was concientización. They are conscious of their role, their society, all the things that are around them. They aren't just mindless, massive people. There's no massive people in Venezuela. You know, it is un pueblo organizado, an organized people who really understand their situation and what is happening. But I'm feeling really, very upset, of course. I've got two sisters who are in their 90s who went through this thing. One of them was told by the neighbor, we're being invaded, and she grabbed her kitchen knife and locked herself in her bedroom and said, if the Marines come, I'm going to defend myself with my kitchen knife. I mean, it was just terrifying, right? So I really I'm so glad that Andreina talked about the terror that people felt in Venezuela. But I am feeling really bad because I see such racism, such bias, such acceptance that us people in Latin America, little brown people, you're the backyard of the United States. Right now, there's a kerfuffle over Greenland. No, I don't want to belittle. I think Greenland is definitely being threatened. But you should see the reactions. They've already sent, a contingency of soldiers there. Even Canada is thinking we're going to send soldiers to defend Greenland, and nothing has happened in Greenland yet. And yet Venezuela was bombed. We've got all those people dead. We have our president and his wife not captured, not arrested, but kidnapped. And I just wondered if this happened in Greenland, we'd have World War III. But the reaction of many states has truly been appalling. In particular, I want to talk about Canada. First of all, the fact that Venezuela was bombed, hardly, and people aren't even talking. I don't think I've heard the politicians say this. The president and his wife have been kidnapped. No, they haven't said this. And one of the things is that comes up all the time. Maduro, the strong man, Maduro, the authoritarian, Maduro, the dictator, Maduro, the guy who stole the elections. Well, somebody asked in the chat there about those elections, and I'd like to say something about the election, how he is truly the constitutional, legitimate president of Venezuela. In 2024, there was a terror campaign against Chavistas, against Chavistas' family, against anyone who looked like a Chavista. This went on for months. It was quite terrifying. Then there was this campaign that all the media went on this campaign saying there's going to be fraud. No vote had taken place, but there's going to be fraud. The opposition will win the majority. And if they don't win, it means that Maduro committed fraud. Now, this is before there was any votes, okay? And then the day of the voting, there was, and this is quite unbelievable, but this actually happened. There was an attack on the Venezuelan electoral process, which is one of the best in the world, even lauded by Jimmy Carter. And what happened was that there was a cyber attack, a massive cyber attack. There were 30 million attacks per minute for 20 hours. Just think of that. And this was a glitch because then they couldn't get out the results as fast as it did. The opposition, but by the way, opposition, I'm talking about Maria Corina Machado. Maria Corina Machado, instrument of the CIA. Maria Corina Machado, who was behind all of this. And so they got an American company called Columbus, who came and they asked him what the hell is happening. They said, this is a cyber attack. And sure enough, they verified that 30 million cyber attacks per minute for 20 hours that affected about 120 state institutions. You couldn't use your credit card. It was just massive. This happened in Venezuela. Then what happened was that they put out, and this was very clever, they put out a website that looked exactly like the official one, in which they put all the lies that they wanted, and that confused a lot. Now, here's what the dictator did. Because there was all this confusion, President Maduro asked that there be a recount, but not just by the electoral authority. He asked that the Supreme Court look at the count. So the count was counted by the electoral process, electoral authority, and then also by the Supreme Court. Now, what kind of a dictator does this is what I want to know. What kind of dictator would do that? And of course, it was verified. He won 51.2% of the votes. And for those of those people out there who say, oh no, the majority was opposition, the majority didn't want Maduro, where are they? Have we seen even 2 people on the streets of Venezuela dancing and saying, hooray, the dictator is gone? No, what we've seen are millions of people in all of the cities and towns out there, like we saw in that video, demanding the return of their president. We have not seen, and look, we've seen people out in the streets in Iran, for example, even under, great duress. But in Venezuela, not one person is out there. And the real opposition, not those frauds that live in Florida and Miami off the monies they stole from Venezuela, living the high life, those are fraudulent. They are leaders of nothing. The real leaders of the opposition in Venezuela, which are about 4 or 5 parties who won their place in Congress, they are all on side. They are all horrified of what has happened. None of them are saying, hooray, the gringos bombed us and they took Maduro. They are decent people who are not going to accept what this has done. So now we see those people saying, trying to say, well, they bombed Venezuela, but he was a dictator. We have to fight that to the end. We have to say, even if he was a dictator, that this state thuggery does not justify the bombing of an innocent country that has done nothing to the United States or to Canada or to any other country in the world, and has bombed by a nuclear power with a force that no other country has, because they are the strongest military in the world. So this business of the dictator, we have got to fight very, very well. Now I want to say something really also that comes from this. This was a vile violation of international law, of the UN Charter, Article 2, of the Geneva Convention, of the Statute of Rome, of the Vienna Conventions, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, even the 1648 Westphalian Principle of Sovereignty. All of these international laws were violated by this Trump person who occupies the presidency in the United States. Now, if we allow international rules to be roughshod like this, well, this means that we don't have a rule on how war should be declared, conducted, prevented, and we will live in the law of the jungle. That is where might is right. So this is something, as Andreina as rightly has said, this can affect any country. And it seems like it's going to affect Greenland too. And I just want to say that people in Canada, I would say in Ottawa, I think that they got these blinkers on. Do they not see that the United States is going to come for Canada's oil, Canada's water, Canada's potassium, and the Arctic? I mean, and of course, they want Canada to be the 51st state. Today, I saw Trump sitting down in his Oval Office with a map, and the map of the world had the American flag on the United States, the American flag on Canada, the American flag on Greenland, and the American flag on Venezuela. He already thinks he's the king of Venezuela, which he's going to get really a big I would say surprise. Now, Canada, if I may, I still have some time, don't I? Has only whispered a concern. Prime Minister Carney said, and I'm going to quote him because this is revolting, Canada calls on all parties to respect international law. Give me a break. All parties, as if these were, two prize fighters of the same weight fighting each other. This is not all parties. This is one bully nuclear party that stepped on a country that had done nothing wrong with them. And although he who is usually a very a very sort of stoic, sort of shy sort of person, has shown outrage over the threat over Greenland. I want to see him show outrage over the bombing and the kidnapping of Venezuela. And I want to say that Canada did not recognize the elections. I didn't recognize the elections in 2018 because it followed religiously the policies of the United States. And at the same time, the United States, they say that Canada wants to separate economically from the United States. Well, that doesn't work unless you separate also politically. And Anita Anand, she's a disgrace. I call for the resignation of Anita Anand, who is the Foreign Minister of Canada. This woman who supposedly teaches law, I want to know what kind of law she teaches. She said with a straight face that Canada does not comment on other nations' foreign affairs. I laughed. I thought that was just such an outrageous lie. But it went further. She went further to say this in front of Marco Rubio's face when he was here in Ottawa for the G7 a couple of weeks ago. She said in front of his face that it was up to the United States itself to decide whether it had or had not violated international law. So next time you catch a criminal police out there, you ask the criminal whether he thinks he's committed a crime. So I have to say this was outrageous. And there's a very famous liberal in Canada called Lloyd Axworthy, liberal himself. He took her to task and he asked her to reverse her wrong course. Well, I think she should just go and I really urge the Prime Minister to get rid of her. So when the U.S. comes for Canadian sovereignty, when the U.S. comes for our oil, water, potash, and the Arctic, why would the nations of Latin America and the Caribbean support when Canada had so obviously failed to support Latin American sovereignty, even in such a stark and brutal case as to what has happened to Venezuela? It's not enough to say that it wants to diversify economically from the United States. It has to disengage politically. And it has been said before, it is important to underline that what happened to Venezuela can happen to any country that doesn't have nuclear weapons. And let me tell you, I'm going to look into my crystal ball and tell you that the countries out there who feel that they are vulnerable, the countries out there are going to increase their weapons. They're going to increase their military budget, and there will be those who will strive to get nuclear weapons, because obviously that is the only thing that's going to stop these people. What we have seen here is imperial looting of natural resources, the oil and the petrodollars. Like Andreina mentioned, what did Trump do with these sanctions? He is the reason the oil companies left Venezuela. Venezuela has always wanted to sell its oil. It had no problem selling oil to the United States or anybody else for that matter. It was the sanctions that drove these people out, as the head of ExxonMobil told Trump directly at that meeting, okay? So these sanctions stopped Venezuela from buying, from selling, from obtaining dollars. So what did Venezuela do? It had to feed its people, and it couldn't get dollars. It couldn't be in the international market. It then sought alternative allies and alternative markets to feed its people. And it started bargaining with the oil, selling oil in actual barrels, or accepting money from yuans or rubles, that is the currency of other countries. And this, my dear friends, is the cornerstone of the US hegemony. Because why are they the top dog? Because everybody needs dollars, because the dollar is used as in the past, gold was used, right? And so now they are in a panic. They want that immense oil that Venezuela has in its soil, that it should be traded in petrodollars, not in rubles or yuans or any other, because all that destroys their power. And so Trump says, "Oh, Venezuela has to get rid of Russia and China, Iran, Turkey, Cuba. None of those people can do business with Venezuela." Well, it's not going to happen, huh? None of that's going to happen. You know why? Because there are solid business contracts with these nations, and they cannot be broken just because you want to or because Trump wants to. And so what we have is a certain part of Venezuela's oil that is quite protected by those contracts with Russia and China. But the US hegemony, based on the Monroe Doctrine, wants these countries out of Venezuela. It wants the control of the oil and the oil to be sold in dollars. They think they've got Delcy Rodriguez and the Chavistas in their hand. Now, it is true that right now there is a gun pointing to Delcy Rodriguez's head, and that gun is the life and well-being of President Maduro and his wife. That, to me, is the biggest threat and the biggest thing that Delcy wants to preserve, apart from, of course, sovereignty and the Chavismo, right? So she is bargaining from a point of I would say, a certain weakness. But where is the strength? The strength is out there on the street. Because if the United States really wants to take over Venezuela, it has to enter Venezuela. And like Chavez said, they may enter, but they will not leave. Because Venezuela is a country that is a liberator country. It liberated South America from the Spaniards. And you think this happened a long time ago and nobody cares? No, let me tell you, the history is vivid, lived in the soul of Venezuelans. And Venezuelans, they will die. It'll be awful. They will die, but they're not going to say to Mr. Trump, yes, come in and do whatever you like here. So what do we have to do? We have to stress that international law is at stake, stress that world order and peace is at stake, that countries are just as vulnerable, unless they've got nuclear power, they're just as vulnerable as Venezuela. And so what we're looking at is that countries will increase their defense spending. So those people who make arms, they're going to be very happy. But very seriously, some may look for nuclear weapons. That's a terrible thing. So it's not just Venezuela. Venezuela's struggle is the struggle for many other countries, because any other nation can be in this situation. We have to continue with the pressure of public opinion on the streets. It has to continue, as we've been doing. And we have to put pressure on the political representatives, especially I'm talking here also in Canada, that we have to press them to denounce Trump and his lackeys. And his dementia has to be widely recognized. This man is demented. He's got dementia, and nobody's saying this. You know, the emperor has no clothes and everybody's bowing to him. So this is really desperate, because this is only Trump's first year in power. So how can the world sustain peace for the next 3 years with this madman at the front? And those people around him who are taking advantage of this, like Marco Rubio, like this man Miller, who are taking advantage of this and carrying out their hawkish fantasies. I beg the people of the United States, we are basically in your hands, because in the end, it will have to be the people of the United States to get rid of this man. You know, call a doctor, have him examined, do what you have to do, but it will be the United States people of the United States who have to make a stand, and all the rest of us to make a true stand to defend Venezuela and defend Venezuela as the symbol of what can happen to any other country. And of course, we must defend international law. If we don't defend these international law, we are all lost, because it will be the war of the jungle, the law of the jungle. So there's a lot for us to do. And I want to thank those of you who have organized this, Allison and Janine, and your organization. As a Venezuelan, I'm tremendously grateful to you for organizing this and bringing together people to show their solidarity for Venezuela. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I also want to say, for anyone who's joining in the Toronto area, Maria, if you can put in the chat how people in the Toronto area can get involved, how people can connect with the Louis Riel Bolivarian Circle, as I know there's more protests happening in Toronto that probably more people on this call can join and get involved in. Thank you so much, Maria, and I'm going to pass it on to our next speaker. We have two more speakers. And so our next speaker is Camila Escalante, who is a journalist, co-founder and editor of Causachan News. I'm sure many of us often get our news from Camila, and she is also a Latin American correspondent for Press TV. So I'll pass the virtual mic over to you, Camila. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. I also wanted to show a clip while we're showing clips. And this one was one of the interviews that was produced by Michaela Ovilar, who is my colleague and produces materials and interviews and reporting from Caracas, Venezuela for Causachan News. And since January 3rd, she too was woken up by the attacks. She lives close to one of the targeted sites, and so she's been doing interviews at some of these mass mobilizations in the streets of Caracas. So I wanted to play one of the clips of one of the interviews that she conducted, and this is with the rector of a university in Venezuela, and she has a bit of a message for the people of the U.S.
Alejandrina Reyes, yo soy la rectora de la Universidad Nacional Experimental Simón Rodríguez, con más de 123,000 estudiantes. Hoy los universitarios, las mujeres universitarias, estamos en la calle exigiendo que nos devuelvan a nuestro presidente constitucional, Nicolás Maduro Moros, y a la primera combatiente y diputada, Cilia Flores. Se metieron con un hijo de las mujeres venezolanas, se metieron con Nicolás Maduro. Hoy las mujeres del mundo tienen que sentir que eso es un hijo que tienen preso allá en Norteamérica y deben rodear las embajadas norteamericanas, tomar esas embajadas, exigirle que suelten a Nicolás, pero además tenemos que provocar un boicot mundial con los productos norteamericanos. No podemos permitir que ellos hagan negocios a través de la guerra. Por eso hoy el pueblo venezolano, la mujer venezolana salió a la calle, y de la calle no salimos más nunca hasta que devuelvan a nuestro presidente obrero Nicolás Maduro Moros. Venceremos.
So she was saying that, she was saying that people should everywhere around the world surround embassies, take embassies in protest of what has taken place. And of course, Venezuelans aren't just saying that this is a terror attack and a crime against the Venezuelan people and Venezuelan sovereignty, but they know that this is an infringement of the sovereignty of all of the countries that have been used in these attacks, including all of the Caribbean countries and the countries of the rest of Latin America that have been used as staging grounds. It's a gross infringement. Not only does the acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, have a gun to her head in this period of crisis negotiation, of hostage negotiation, in which they're trying to free the abducted president and the first combatant, but the other countries and their governments around the region also have a gun to their head. I mean, you can see the way in which the countries, particularly of the Caribbean, have had to negotiate with the United States in order to try to stay in good favor with them. And they've made a lot of gross concessions, but we don't actually know what the terms are or what the details of the sorts of agreements. An example is the radar, the military radar that was installed on Tobago, and the other various ways in which Trinidad and Tobago and its prime minister allowed the United States to use its international airport, to use its airspace in order to conduct a number of the operations, not only surrounding the January 3rd attack, but some of the other operations that have taken place previous to that. And of course, they're using, occupied Puerto Rico and so many other countries in order to carry out the different naval operations in the Caribbean Sea that have resulted in these extrajudicial killings and these massacres on these boats, both in the Caribbean, but then also in the Pacific. So she's calling for, the surrounding of these embassies. She's saying on the exterior, we need to be doing these things. And of course, she's also talking about a boycott of US products. And in a normal situation, to speak of Canada, but also the United States or anywhere, Canadian MPs, members of parliament, would be visiting the Venezuelan embassy and consulates over the last 18 days. And of course, they're not operating in Canada because we don't have relations with Venezuela, but they would be signing books of condolences. They would be urging a response from the federal government. We saw in the UK that Jeremy Corbyn and another MP from Leeds actually went to the Venezuelan embassy and they signed a book of condolences and they met with the Venezuelan ambassador. That would be the normal thing to do in a situation where 108 people were killed in a US terror attack and at least 150 people were injured. And the people that were killed in the most gruesome way. They were literally bombed or shot to shreds, and their bodies are in pieces. It's really gruesome. It's probably better that those images aren't circulated, but they died, defending their country, defending their country's sovereignty. But they certainly pushed back, despite what the media headlines tried to suggest. So just to add on to what the others had to say about, Canada's contribution to this economic war and these genocidal unilateral coercive measures or sanctions on Venezuela, there have been 1,085 unilateral coercive measures. And of those, Canada has imposed the second highest number of direct sanctions against Venezuela after the United States. And these are sanctions that have genocidal intent. We've spoken so much about the necessity or the responsibility of states to prevent genocide in the case of Gaza, in the case of Palestine, and that that states have an international commitment to prevent genocide in the case of those countries that are contributing to the genocide by selling arms and all the different things in the case of Germany and Canada and so forth. But in the case of these sanctions, they have just as what was said earlier, they have been documented by this UN special rapporteur when she visited Venezuela, and they did result in the depriving of Venezuelan citizens of medicine, of food, of normal things, health supplies and equipment. And so Canada plays a role in that. If we are to believe that Venezuela is a country where people have low salaries, a country where, according to the Canadian government, there's some sort of corruption going on by the Venezuelan authorities, or any of the other things that Canada has been throwing around, and that is suggested by the media, how on earth can anyone justify exacerbating the situation by depriving a country of its income and its ability to go out into the international market and buy things for its population? It's completely unjustifiable, and its intention is to starve the people of Venezuela and make them miserable and make them sick, and so that they can die. That is precisely what sanctions are for, and that's why we have these countries sanctioning the countries that are already historically deprived of rights economically in the world and exploited through the processes of colonization and now imperialism. Delcy said, acting president Delcy Rodriguez, she spoke at this annual sort of address to the nation before the National Assembly. And normally that would have been President Nicolas Maduro giving that speech. And she said that in 2025, or by 2025, Venezuela had reached a historic milestone of 19 consecutive quarters of economic growth, positioning the country as the leader in economic growth. In 2025, the GDP registered an 8.5 increase. And additionally, acting President Delcy Rodriguez said that people's power was consolidated in 2025 with the almost $300 million that was invested in 35,000 projects implemented by the communes and the communal councils. And this is something that has really picked up in the last 2 years with the popular consultations that have been held, I think now 7 times in the last 2 years, to vote on projects at the local level so that people can select the sort of projects that they need to be able to improve things in their own communities. It's really a process that is just the deepening of grassroots democracy in Venezuela. And so this is just to say that with 25 years of threats and attacks, we have seen 25 years of Venezuelan and Bolivarian revolutionary triumph over imperialist attacks. They won. Venezuela won. And the 25 years of operations failed. The economic siege failed. And that's why the United States had to invent new designations like the foreign terrorist designation of Tren de Aragua and the fake Cartel de los Soles. And they had to, increase its military presence and carry out these different operations in order to attack Venezuela because they weren't able to bring down the government or the revolution otherwise. I see that I have very little time, but I wanted to talk about the role of the press. Maybe that was the most important thing that I could speak about. We're seeing a lot of fake news. We're seeing a lot of speculation and rumors, and the leadership in Venezuela, the leadership of both the government and the party, the PSUV, have warned against this sort of speculating, and they say that it has the aim of trying to create division within the ranks of Chavismo, within the ranks of the grassroots within the country that supports the Bolivarian Revolution. And it's important to remember that when we're reading commentary and we're seeing and hearing pundits and analysts and journalists or reporters online who are giving out all sorts of information and takes, they are effectively always engagement farming. They're necessarily engagement farming. That's what everybody does now because they're seeking clicks and they require this level of online engagement and selling tales and fantasies to us in order to gain these followers, clicks, subscribers, and income. Because the reality is, and I'm speaking as a journalist, that we no longer have positions and jobs in conventional media. Everything has become freelance. There are fewer and fewer ways of making income as a journalist. And so they are selling you these speculative ideas and the sort of weird framing that they have that never really materializes. And people are taking that information and they're replicating it in our group chats, they're replicating it on their own social media, and they're telling their friends and family, which is very irresponsible. Venezuela is not new to the information war, the disinformation war. The mainstream media outlets and foreign agencies have been claiming to have scoops and inside information, which are consistently US regime anonymous sources, anonymous contacts. We never find out where the source of this information is, but it's being fed to us constantly in a way that's impossible to refute on every single point, because it's just a constant stream of disinformation. This began long before January 3rd, and a lot of the fake news that came out has proven to be wrong already, and it wasn't retracted to this day. So just to list off some of the things that were said that were categorically false, that were not retracted by the corporate media and by online speculators who are selling us tales. They said that Delcy Rodriguez was in Moscow on January 3rd. She was in fact in Caracas. We saw her immediately, and she was sworn in as acting president. Before that, they had said that President Maduro was preparing to flee, and he was preparing every 3 days to board planes to a different place, whether it was Tehran, Moscow, Istanbul, Qatar, wherever it was. He wasn't. He didn't. He never had to flee. He stood there until the end. They said that a captain named Juan Escalona was killed on January 3rd. He's alive and well. He has a position in the government. He's on TV every day. They said that chavistas are going around looking for Trump-supporting gringos, and that they are people on motorcycles who are chavistas are attacking people in the streets. This is categorically false. And the government has stated in many ways that this is false, because right now there's no need to activate any sort of law or parastate groups on the local level in the communities or anything, because the security forces of the country, under the leadership of the relevant authorities, national authorities and state authorities in Venezuela, have control over the country. The interior minister is going around with the national police and policing the country, as you would after any terrorist attack or such incidents. So there's nothing like that going on. But there's all sorts of other false headlines that that it would take hours to sit there and go after every single one of them. I think that there's no besides Telesur and Canal 8, VTV, the state television channel of Venezuela, there's no reason to sort of recommend good sources on Venezuela or good journalists. Really, what needs to happen is that people have to take individual responsibility and learn how to properly properly interact with media outlets and information online. We have to learn media literacy. We have to learn how to interact with and engage with social media, because social media is changing for all of us. If you're 20 years old, social media has changed since you were a teenager. If you're 70 years old, you've seen a hell of a lot more changes. And it's very rapid, even for those of us who work in social media or in the media. So it requires a great deal of initiative. And so for that reason, I recommend this great article in Cuba Debate that was written by the Media Observatory of Cuba Debate about deepfakes, AI, and fake news in the case of Venezuela. I'll post it in the chat. And just quickly, because I know I'm out of time, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in Toronto. In Toronto, there is a relatively newly formed coalition. It's called Venezuela Solidarity Coalition, and it's made up of 20 organizations. They're not new organizations. These are organizations have been around for a long time, like Latin American and Caribbean Solidarity Network, like Caribbean Solidarity Network, like Labor for Palestine, and others who have formed this coalition in recent months in order to respond together to the threats against Venezuelan sovereignty, but also against the sovereignty of the rest of the countries of the Caribbean and Latin America, because we know that all of our countries are under threat by US imperialism and its allies. And so on Saturday, there is a big rally planned. It is forecasted to be -14 degrees Celsius. It's going to be really cold, but this rally has very important endorsements from some labor councils and from different organizations, including Filipino organizations, including Palestinian groups. And so, rain or shine, or -14 degrees plus wind chill, we will be out there in front of the U.S. consulate. I'll also post that in the chat. And for more information on some of the actions and events coming up in Toronto, I'll also post the link to the Instagram, which is the best way to find information on that, which is Venezuela Solidarity Coalition on Instagram.
Thank you so much, Camila, for all of that information. And I think the most important thing, finishing on how to get involved, how to be part of the important actions that are happening in Toronto, and I'm sure many other parts of the world right now. Before I go on to our next speaker, I'll just say I'm going through some of the questions in the chat. There are a few about the U.S. allegations of Maduro stealing the elections, and I think all of our speakers have spoken very well to that. But if there's, of course, anything that the speakers would like to post in the chat in terms of resources, and thank you, Camila, for also your point about, how to read the news and find where the truth is between all of the media spins. Appreciate that. Thank you for answering a lot of the questions before we even get to the question and answer period. I'm going to go on to our final speaker for this evening before our Q&A. Alison Bodine is a social justice activist and author based in Vancouver, Canada. She's a founding member of the Venezuela Solidarity Network and the author of the book Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Venezuela by Battle of Ideas Press. Alison has also been an international observer for Venezuelan elections on 5 separate occasions and has traveled to Venezuela 12 times. So I'll pass the virtual mic over to Alison, our final speaker.
Excellent. Thank you, Janine. Thank you to the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network for calling this webinar together. I wanted to acknowledge that this is a female-run webinar. All women voices. That is not the norm when it comes to, leftist to progressive events all the time. So thank you to all the fantastic women that have joined on this panel and helped call it together. Andreina, Maria, Camilla, we are not strangers to one another. Unfortunately, we've known each other because of the ties that bind us in this struggle in solidarity with Venezuela and the peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean. And all of us in our own ways, I think, have been very integral to the necessary response to the US's horrific escalation of war against Venezuela on January 3rd. Everyone has spoken very eloquently, of course, about on the ground in Venezuela, about the necessity of the response of people living, especially in North America and Canada, and about the reality and how to break through the media misinformation and disinformation about what is happening in Venezuela today. Many other topics. I'm hoping I can zoom us out a bit, talk a bit about the question that was being asked, often in November before the brutal US attack, which was, is the US going to attack Venezuela and why? And now we're left with the US did attack Venezuela and why, which I think is important to address today as we close out. What has led us to this point where we are today, January 20th, the first year, ironically enough, of the inauguration of US President Trump. When we are gathering here at this webinar, people in the US are having, let's hope, massive demonstrations against the Trump presidency today, and solidarity with Venezuela, to abolish ICE, and many other important causes. The United States, of course, didn't begin their attack under Trump's presidency or the first Trump presidency, but long before. As others have described, the US has been targeting Venezuela for 25 years and more through coup attempts, sabotage, sanctions, now a naval blockade, especially targeted on Venezuela. And Venezuela has been in the crosshairs of the United States imperialism since then, since 1998 in the election of Comandante Hugo Chavez, because the Bolivarian revolutionary process stands up for its independence and sovereignty, and the people of Venezuela have chosen time and time again in multiple elections, as people have addressed, to continue to develop their country through something called the Bolivarian revolutionary process. Since August, with the sea blockade of Venezuela by the US Navy, these attacks have been escalating, culminating, of course, in the brutality of the January 3rd bombing and kidnapping of President Maduro and first combatant Cilia Flores, and the murder of over 100 people, including 32 Cuban nationals serving in Venezuela. The US extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean and the Pacific have used airstrikes to target small fishing boats, killing more than 100 people, using Canadian technology, I'll say, to carry out those airstrikes. The US mobilized the largest military force in the Caribbean since the 1950s. We're talking, attack helicopters, aircraft carriers, all sorts of naval fleet vehicles amassed in the Caribbean, and then especially on the occupied territory of Puerto Rico. And then subsequently saw this increasing media disinformation campaign claiming that Venezuela is first a narco state, sending drugs to the United States, something that's fairly easily debunked if you read the reports of the DEA, of the Drug Enforcement Agency of the United States itself, or the United Nations. But then also, I think importantly, calling Venezuela a narco-terrorist state for its support for the axis of resistance, countries like Iran and Yemen, movements such as Hamas and Hezbollah, and of course, targeting Venezuela's fraternal relationship with Cuba. This is the reason they say that Venezuela is a narco-terrorist state, for its support for Palestine and its support for other countries that stand up against US imperialism. On November 27th, John Bolton, who was ambassador to the United Nations under George Bush and a national security advisor under Trump's first term, wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post, and it started, quote, "The Venezuelan people have every reason to overthrow Nicolas Maduro's repressive, corrupt, failing regime. The pervasive presence and influence of Russia, China, and Iran in Venezuela add compelling national security reasons for the United States and other Western Hemisphere neighbors to help. Maduro's dictatorship has no redeeming social value," end quote. He went in to, weave an entire web of lies, but as with many articles we've all been reading, Washington Post, New York Times, other opinion pieces, I think that important statements that point towards US strategy come out. And in this case, I think the words of John Bolton, specifically naming Russia, China, and Iran in Venezuela, are an important admission as to the reason, the why, as to why the United States bombed Venezuela on January 3rd and kidnapped President Maduro and Cilia Flores. I think the January 3rd US attack was also a warning to Latin America, and that's also not a far stretch given the words of Trump himself, who quickly justified the attacks and expanded the attacks by saying that Cuba, Colombia, Nicaragua, and Mexico would be next. All of this on January 3rd and Trump's, bellicose statements come within the international relationship of forces, where we've seen a decline of US imperialism around the world. And the attack on Venezuela was an attack exactly on the growing influence of China and Russia, and I think especially in this case, China, which has a significant presence in Latin American countries and in their economic and social development. And I think Venezuela was the first target to begin to push back against China and Russia and also Iran in the Western Hemisphere, as we've observed the development of the new Cold War II and the US attempts to complete hegemony in Latin America. Specifically on Cuba, I think it's important to say today that the attacks against Cuba have continued and intensified. US President Trump is threatening to overthrow the Cuban government, to cut off all diesel supply to Cuba, which it would involve an escalation of their genocidal blockade against Cuba. And diesel is how the Cuban people not only fuel vehicles, but how the island is powered with electricity. The US is attempting to regain hegemony in Latin America, and Venezuela and Cuba stood firmly in their way. Cuba is a bastion against imperialist expansion in Latin America and hegemony, and as we know, is only 90 miles from the United States, daring to continue to stand up strong against US imperialism. And I think US hegemony in Latin America is becoming increasingly important, especially as we see the US-Israeli genocide continue to be defeated by Palestinians, and have also just in the last week observed their regime change plans in Iran fail and fall flat on their face. Now, I think January 3rd's attack and the kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro and Cilia Flores is a partial setback for working people in Latin America and worldwide. We have to recognize that the country of Venezuela is without its rightful president, and the United States has successfully once again broken and busted apart international law with no recourse. This is a defeat, but it is a bigger and a big defeat. Try not to use all of Trump's exaggeratory words, but a big defeat for the United States, no matter how you look at it. The United States has not achieved its most important goal, which was the regime change in Venezuela and to reverse the Bolivarian revolutionary process in Venezuela. Adriana, Maria, Camila, all have spoken to this. That is not what we've seen in Venezuela. That's not what we heard from people on the streets of Venezuela today. It took 5 months since August for the United States to mobilize all its mighty military power to be able to attack Venezuela in the limited way that they did and kidnap President Maduro and Cilia Flores. They didn't do this surgical strike that they talked about. They were resisted. They had to murder 100 people or more in this attack. They were successful, yes, but it was a big defeat for them. President Maduro and Cilia Flores are imprisoned in the United States as prisoners of war. They are in the hands of the US, so it is a setback for all working people. But the state, the government, the governance, the economy, Venezuela is stable. And most important, Venezuela's independence remains intact. The revolutionary people of Venezuela and the government, the acting government of Delcy Rodriguez, despite whatever compromises may come to light with the US as far as especially the sale of of diesel and petroleum to the United States, Delcy Rodriguez continues to lead Venezuela and for a just society and continues to lead the struggle in Venezuela for a just society and a better world. And the Bolivarian revolutionary process continues. I wanted to just say shortly that what we've seen with Venezuela's constant mobilizations, which I encourage people to, follow everyone here that's speaking on social media, follow Drop Site News, where Andreina is reporting regularly, follow Causachan News, where Camila does a lot of work especially in translation of important statements and, mobilizations in Venezuela. In my experience, Chavistas mobilizing the streets are continuing the process that they started under President Nicolas Maduro and Comandante Hugo Chavez. And what that has meant to me in all the times I've been to Venezuela, what I've had the privilege to observe on so many occasions, is that Venezuelans are mobilizing. They are mobilizing because this is a characteristic of the Bolivarian revolutionary process, to go out into the streets in tens of thousands and millions and defend their sovereignty and independence. And this has been a characteristic especially since the 2024 presidential election, when after the right-wing attack against the presidential election, Venezuelans took to the streets and defended their revolution. They mobilized in large numbers and then organized the communal elections. And since the 2024 presidential election, there's been 2 or 3 national elections and a constant stream of these communal elections taking place. Now, we as peace-loving people have to do our job also. We have to do our job within Canada and the United States, especially Britain, other imperialist countries, and that is to build a united front against war in Venezuela and for the immediate return of President Maduro and Cilia Flores. Defending Venezuela continues to be a central task for peace-loving people and anyone who believes that a better and just world is not only necessary but possible. We must see with clarity that standing with Venezuela's sovereignty and self-determination is a critical point for revolution and counter-revolution in Latin America and for a growing worldwide anti-Zionist and anti-imperialist movement. In an interview with Federico Mayor Zaragoza, who was the former UNESCO Director General in January of the year 2000, so 26 years ago, Comandante Fidel Castro, president of Cuba and Cuban revolutionary, responded to a question about US hypocrisy that he was asked by Federico by saying, quote, "The market will dry up someday for the industry of lies. It is drying up already. If you really delve into the truth, you will realize that the political conception of imperialism, as well as the neoliberal economic order and globalization process imposed on the world, is orphaned and defenseless when it comes to ideas and ethics. It is in this field that the main struggle of our times will be decided. And the final result of this battle, with no possible alternative, will be on the side of truth and on the side of humanity." And those are what the words that I found that are speaking to me, that I want to bring to you, to appeal to you, to act on the basis of these wise and revolutionary words. Fidel's words are a call to action to speak the truth, or as we say, speak the truth to power, which means organize and mobilize and educate. And in this case, to use this brutal attack on January 3rd as an opportunity to expose the rotten core of imperialist attacks on Venezuela, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and to really take that up with our whole hearts and our whole organizing ability. I'm going to put in the chat a few upcoming events and links to get involved. The Venezuela Solidarity Network, of which I'm a co-founder, involves groups in the United States, Canada, and Britain, organizing consistently in defense of Venezuela since December of 2023. And we're part of a broader coalition organizing a January 23rd through 31st week of action in defense of Venezuela and to resist the US war machine. Miguel Diaz-Canel, the current president of Cuba, during one of the many marches that Cuba has held to recognize their martyrs murdered by the United States on January 3rd, said Cuba, quote, "is not an anti-imperialist by book. And imperialism made us anti-imperialist. But not only Cuba, the world will become increasingly anti-imperialist after this assault on all international norms. This offense against intelligence and human dignity, this act of criminal arrogance with which a sovereign state is attacked by an empire that despises the rest of the nations." Again, words of truth that we have to take to the streets with us. Webinars like this one must continue to bring us together. I am very grateful for the space to have spoken and the time to have spent with all of you here tonight. Must bring us together in a united front against US imperialism, against their savage and criminal aggression worldwide. More than 20 years ago, we in Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, of which I'm the coordinator of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, said that we are in a new era of war and occupation, an era that will stay with us for decades to come. After we saw the destruction of many countries by way of wars and occupations, and lastly, the genocide in Gaza, since the early 2000s, we have reached a very dangerous point in the world. Mobilization, education, and organization are more necessary than ever to fight against imperialist aggression. The Venezuelan people and Venezuelan revolutionary government, with the spirit of the Bolivarian revolutionary process, continue their struggle against imperialism, continue to defend their self-determination and independence, and we must continue to build a strong united front in defense of Venezuela. We will win. Venceremos.
Venceremos. Thank you, Allison. Best word to end your talk on and get us going for our question and answer. So thank you again, Allison. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Andreina and Camila, for all of your talks. This has been an incredibly educational and inspiring webinar, and as was mentioned, an all-woman-led webinar tonight, and actually the second all-woman panelist webinar of the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. We found ourselves in the same position for another webinar a few months ago. Before I open up into our question and answer, I do want to let people know, as I mentioned at the beginning, that the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network has been organizing against the U.S. attacks and threats of Venezuela. We have a statement that I'll put in the chat that we came out with, I think, in October. And also on January 3rd, immediately following the U.S. attacks on Venezuela and kidnapping of Maduro, President Maduro and Cilia Flores, the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network issued a call to action that was responded to with actions, multiple actions in 13 cities across Canada. So I'm going to share a quick video before we answer a few question and answers. I know we have a longer webinar today, but it'll mix things up a bit, see some of the action that happened across Canada before we answer a few questions. So 1 second as I share my screen here. Okay.
¿Y por qué amas tanto a Venezuela? Venezuela, un amor profundo, un sentimiento que no entiendes, pero yo te explico con todo el mundo. Porque amo esta tierra que me vio nacer. ¿Y por qué amas tanto a Venezuela? Venezuela corre por sus venas. Amo su vida llena de valentía. En cada paso una historia se desvela.
All right, a little view of all of the actions, well, some of the actions really across Canada, and since there have definitely been many more, I've just put in the chat the link to that video on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And if you are organizing an action, I've also put in the chat our email for the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. You can also tag us on social media, and we can keep spreading the word and getting more people out on the streets defending Venezuela. So we have quite a few questions. I'm going to group a few of them together, and we might not get to them all, and I know some are being answered on the Q&A box by written answers. But we'll start with 3 questions, 2 which are a bit similar. One from Claudia saying, I would like to know if there's a conversation between China and Venezuela. China has investments in Venezuela, and I want to know where they stand in all of this. And then also a question from Yuri on a similar vein, a question to all panelists, and also saying thank you for all your wonderful presentations. You're all brilliant, super heroines in my eyes. And my question is, do you think that the kidnapping of President Maduro and Madame Flores shows the severe limitations of China and Russia, BRICS, and multipolarity? And then on another vein, a question from Mona saying, I keep seeing people say that Maduro was bad at economics. And I think as many of the speakers have already answered, how can you have a thriving economy with sanctions? But this is a question that has even come from some leftists. So maybe some information on how to debunk that. So I'll start with those 3 questions. We have a couple of more. We'll try to get to them all, but if we don't, I apologize if we do not get to everyone's questions. Who from our speakers would like to start?
Well,
go ahead, Maria.
I would like to say that the relationship between Venezuela and China is very strong. When nobody wanted anything to do with Venezuela because of these sanctions and everything that they were doing, the Chinese came and they offered what Venezuela needed: loans, definitely, and all sorts of projects, really important infrastructure projects. I think there are 600 projects, contracts with China to do with ports and roads and I think dams and such things. So these are all very important contracts with China that Venezuela would, many of them would buy, and it would buy it with oil. So Venezuela couldn't pay in dollars, couldn't even pay in wands because of these terrible 1,000 plus sanctions. So the Chinese said, it's okay, you pay us with petroleum. That means that Venezuela has a debt to China of, I calculate, about $6 billion. And that's not something they have to pay immediately. This is obviously through years and whatnot. But the Chinese don't think about 5-year plans. They think much broader than that. Okay, so the Chinese are in no hurry. These are long-term contracts that are being done. These are unbreakable contracts. This is not a contract that Venezuela could say, okay, I rip them up, or China could say, I rip them up. They are solid commercial contracts with all kinds of commercial laws attached to it. So the United States cannot break them. What Trump has just found out, that Venezuela has this big debt. And if he starts selling Venezuelan oil, what happens normally, let's say there's a bankruptcy and you want to sell the assets, the people who are owed say, hold on a minute, you can't sell this asset because you have to pay this debt. So it's really put Trump over a barrel. You're going to sell this oil? Well, guess what? You're going to have to take on this debt, which of course, so what this does is it really protects Venezuela. This is a great protection for Venezuela, which the Chinese and Venezuela worked out. The same thing happens with Russia, with some of the contracts that has the Russia. Just last year, Maduro extended the Russian oil company that is piping oil out of Venezuela for another 15 years. So again, Venezuela can't rip this up, nor can Russia. So again, these have been done in a very clever, good way, in which means that nobody can chuck the Russians out of there, and nobody can chuck the Chinese out of there. So Trump is over a barrel. I want to say something else. You know, when nobody wanted anything to do with Venezuela, when the United States and Canada forbade Pfizer and Moderna to sell vaccines to Venezuela, they wanted us dead. Let them die of COVID. Huge planes arrived to Venezuela from Russia and from China with their vaccines. And I don't think the Venezuelan people will ever forget that, because these vaccines saved lives. Not only, and before the vaccines, the planes came with all the kinds of medical equipment that the doctors needed, the masks and the respirators and all of that also came from Russia and China. So although we've got this I would say solid commercial locked in with China and Russia, we also have a very, I would say, emotive or sentimental union, because people in Venezuela said these people have come from across the world. Venezuela didn't have very much to do with either Russia or China, and yet these people came across the world to help us, and that is very, very important. They are very well looked at and thought of. No one's thinking that they're sort of pushing their weight around. Now, the question of the defense. We right now in Venezuela are very much being defended by China and Russia, both on the I would say public speaking. I mean, they both, told Trump, you've got to let go of the president, and who knows what's going on behind closed doors. The Russians are very upset that their missiles weren't used. And many people thought, what? This was very bad for Russia, because Russia also sells arms, and people are going to say, oh, the Russian missiles don't work. That was due to an internal, I would say, treason that went on, that some of those missiles were not activated. So and the Chinese are involved. They are looking as to what went wrong. So both China and Russia are examining and trying to study what it was that happened there. This will be very, very important for both of them, because this was a new weapon that the Americans used, which was a cyber weapon that closed all communication, electricity, internet, everything, that then allowed, and then there were 150 planes going around Caracas, all using this cyber instrument to stop the radars, so that they allowed the helicopters to come in. This is a very sophisticated kind of weaponry that nobody knew they had, right? So right now, the Russia and China are really studying this issue and trying to find out what it was exactly that went wrong. So no, we in Venezuela are still very, very, I would say, happy and actually counting on China and Russia, who have a lot of weight in the international field to help us, and to help us especially save Nicolas Maduro's life.
Thank you, Maria. Would anyone else like to address those questions before we go on to a few other questions? Okay. So a couple of other questions. I'm going to go on to one other question, and then I think we'll have one other very specific question, and then a few others that we'll end off with. So a question from Fargo, who asked, in March 2024, Venezuela designated Essequibo, a region Venezuela has disputed for more than a century, as a new Venezuelan state. This came more than 10 years after the Venezuelan Navy intercepted an oil survey vessel in its marine territory. Yet, despite the dispute, Guyana awarded ExxonMobil to begin extraction. Do panelists consider the Essequibo land dispute and Guyana's unilateral decision to sell Venezuelan oil to a U.S. corporation as a factor in the U.S.'s latest imperial assault against Venezuelan sovereignty? If so, can anyone elaborate on the role that the Essequibo dispute and its relation to current events? Do any of our panelists want to answer that question?
So I just wanted to say that that is a question that takes a lot of historical background to understand the whole diplomatic conflict between Venezuela and Guyana in terms of the Essequibo region. Basically, there is a historical dispute about which country the Essequibo belongs to. Venezuela has been always pushing for a diplomatic resolution to this conflict. A dialogue between two sovereign nations instead of relying on an international court that we all know is going to always align with U.S. interests, with imperial interests. So Venezuela has always been pushing for the idea of having a dialogue with Guyana to resolve this issue. It is true that despite the fact that we have this active territorial dispute, Guyana gave a license to ExxonMobil to begin extracting oil in the disputed area between Venezuela and Guyana. Perhaps I don't want to speculate. Of course, I believe that what the United States is doing against Venezuela is not only because they want to overthrow the Bolivarian process and take over the oil industry and oil and natural resources of Venezuela. It is also because they want to destroy Cuba. They also want to be able to more easily colonize Guyana, which is something that it is very worrisome for the entire region. The fact that Guyana has slowly become a vassal country. I definitely think there's a correlation there, that everything that is happening against Venezuela has this more broad strategy that is about taking over the entire Latin American region. That is why we have been seeing Trump making threats against Mexico, making threats against Colombia, against Cuba, because at the end of the day, Venezuela is just the beginning. And that is something that we have been denouncing before the bombings on January 3rd, before the kidnapping of President Maduro. We were denouncing that an attack against Venezuela was going to be the first action that the U.S. was going to take in order to become more aggressive against Latin America, in order to start intervening in a more aggressive way against Latin America. So I think there's definitely a relation there. There's definitely a relation in the fact that if the United States is able to control Venezuela, they're going to have a more easy access to all of these other countries and these regions that have a lot of oil.
Thank you, Andreina. I know that was a very big question. I think one that probably a lot of people have that question, but I think there was some more information that's being posted in the chat for more of the historical information on Essequibo from Orinoco Tribune that can help with that question. All right, so I am going to ask our final round of questions before we wrap up. I'll touch on a few different topics, so speakers can try and answer whichever questions they are able to. So one from Evelyn, who is troubled by the fact that the president of Colombia, President Petro, who seems good and just, did not recognize Maduro as president, if anyone wants to comment on that. And another person asked if we can discuss the Israel connections and how the interim president hinted at Israel's connections with the attack on Venezuela. We have a question from Jorge about the conditions right now in Venezuela. How are people doing? How is the security and stores, schools, hospitals, subways functioning and being open and overall daily life? Another question from both Fargo and Wayne about any updates on the conditions of Cilia Flores and Nicolas Maduro in prison and any updates on their imprisonment. So we'll leave that last round of questions. Again, if anyone asked a question that did not get asked, I am sorry. We have a wonderful attendance today and a lot of questions, but we could not get to them all. So who would like to start off with those questions, and also any closing comments if the speakers would like to make in this last round of questions? Yeah, go ahead, Maria. Thank you.
Let me see. What do I have to? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you know, Petro takes one step forward and one step backwards sometimes, but I would say that on this occasion, he is certainly very troubled what has happened in Venezuela, and he knows exactly that he is also in the crosshairs. Actually, Trump has said it, and has said it before this is happening. And I have to say that Petro and President Maduro have both worked steadily together to really clean up the limits between both countries, the frontier there. The frontier was really out of control. And as soon as Petro became a president, despite, not totally agreeing, they worked at that level, both of them, very, very well. And right now, I would say the conditions on the frontier of Venezuela and Colombia are infinitely better than it was before. And that's because the two presidents are in agreement they have to clear that of all these outlaws that live there and such. And of course, the contraband and the narco gangs that are on the side of Colombia. But Petro said something very important. And he said this, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks ago or more. He said, if Venezuela is invaded by the Marines, the Colombian army will unite with the Venezuelan army to fight the invaders. This is huge when he said this, because those of you who know the history of Colombia and Venezuela know that Colombia and Venezuela used to be La Gran Colombia, and used to be one country, and we fought together the war for independence. So he was using this historical link to say, you're threatened, we're threatened, we'll fight this together. And I believe that it is true. What happens with Petro is that he doesn't have such a strong backing like Chavismo, right? He's got tremendous opposition from a very, very powerful financial elite, which is hand in hand with the narco traffic in Colombia. So his life, I'm surprised he's alive, quite frankly, because he has really been in a very dangerous situation. So I think at this point, Petro is backing Maduro and hoping that he returns, and certainly hoping that Venezuela is not invaded. As to the Israel connection, I have no particular information to give, except to say that the Mossad are experts in doing precisely what happened in Venezuela. That is, zooming into a country and either assassinating or grabbing a politician that they don't like. I do not know whether they had a hand in this. I have no information over that. But if you look at what the Mossad has done in the Middle East, you see, well, it sounds very much what had happened here. But again, this is only me thinking that there are similarities. I have no actual information on that. And as to the update, I understand from the latest that President Maduro had an injury to his knee and that finally he got medical attention. And I believe that Cilia also got medical attention. This is what I heard. Maybe someone there, Andreina, might know more about that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for covering many of the questions. Any of our other speakers, would you like to address any of those questions or any other closing comments?
I would like to just add a few things to what Maria already explained very well. The first one about Petro, I just have to remind people that there has been a campaign by the far right in Latin America, by mainstream media in Latin America, depicting Venezuela as a fatal destiny for any people that elects a leftist government. So there has been this campaign that, oh, if you elect a leftist government, you're going to be the next Venezuela. You're going to have all of this economic collapse. They never mention U.S. sanctions. They never mention all the economic sabotage that the U.S. has orchestrated against Venezuela. But they always scare people, saying that if you vote for a leftist government, you're going to become Venezuela. So for leftist, progressive people like Gustavo Petro, when they are running for the presidency, they have to establish some distance from Venezuela, because otherwise it would be a death sentence to proclaim their support openly for Venezuela, for President Nicolas Maduro. And even once elected, President Petro still needed to somehow make it seem like he is not completely aligned with the government of President Maduro. You can criticize it, of course, and I do. I criticize it a lot, because I think you have to have a very defined political position, especially when you are a leader of a country. But at the same time, I understand that the way that the propaganda works against Venezuela, the way that the media and the far-right movement has made Venezuela almost toxic to talk about, I understand that there is a necessity to be able to establish some kind of distance. However, President Gustavo Petro established diplomatic relations with Venezuela immediately after he took power. Remember that Venezuela and Colombia didn't have diplomatic relations because the previous far-right governments were involved in a bunch of coup attacks against Venezuela, a bunch of destabilization attempts, even an invasion attempt. And President Gustavo Petro reestablished diplomatic relations. He visited Venezuela twice, in 2022 and 2023. So even though that he was trying to establish some distance, in practice, in actions, he was a supporter of Venezuela. He was friends with the Venezuelan government. And I also know for a fact that he is very afflicted by what happened to Venezuela, and he knows that this is a threat for all of Latin America. And about Israel, so like Maria, I also don't have information about that. But I do remember that one of the first public speeches that acting President Delcy Rodriguez gave after President Maduro was kidnapped, she said that this whole operation against Venezuela had a Zionist smell, like a Zionist feeling to it. So she already has, the Venezuelan government, our leaders, they already know that there's some Zionist behind this entire military operation, because the way it was carried out is very similar to the way the Zionist military army does in Gaza, in Palestine. So we know there's a Zionist element in all of this. There is this Zionist man, I can't remember his name right now. I think it's Martin something. He's a Venezuelan national. He was born in Venezuela, but he nationalized as an Israeli citizen many years ago. And he's one of the people who has been behind the campaign that Delcy was the one who betrayed Maduro, that Chavismo is fractured. So we already know that there are Zionist elements behind the narrative trying to portray Venezuela as a fractured, debilitated government when we know that's not the truth. We have reason to believe that behind the military attack, there were some Zionist elements too. Also, I know that's a question about daily life in Venezuela, so I'm just going to answer that right away. So basically, daily life has returned to normal in all of Venezuela. School began on January 12th. People are going to work. All public services, hospitals, schools, recreational areas, the beaches, everything is just open. Everything's just working back to normal. All commercial stores are working all back to normal. The very first 2 days after the military attack, we did see very empty streets and people just a little bit afraid, thinking that it can happen again. People were just purchasing water and like essential food to have in case something happened. Not many stores open, but that lasted like the first few days. After that, we have like this reinforcement from President Delcy Rodriguez and the entire Venezuelan government saying, let's return to normal, let's reclaim our normality because that is a form of resistance. Reclaiming your daily life, reclaiming that you can live in peace in your own country, it is a form of resistance. It is a way to be subversive against an attack that was trying to create a civil war in Venezuela. They were trying to create an implosion. They were trying to make the country completely destabilized, so we will overthrow the rest of the government. And that didn't happen. So that's why the fact that the country is at peace is something so important to emphasize.
Thank you very much, especially for your on-the-ground perspective of what is happening right now in Venezuela. Allison, do you have anything for answering any of those questions or closing comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think that Andreina actually started in her initial presentation talking about the position that different governments are in, or maybe it was Camilla, the different governments are in, especially in the Caribbean and Latin America. Basically at the, they're under the gun, they're in the barrel of US imperialism. And so I think, it's important for us to understand their role in ongoing US attacks and the countries that have unfortunately fallen under tremendous pressure and are collaborating with the United States or not defending Venezuela in a way that we may think or wish would happen. But I think that it really just speaks to me as far as what our responsibility is. What can we do as people living in the United States and Canada? People in Venezuela are doing their job. They're not, silent actors in this. They're not victims. They voted in a revolutionary Bolivarian government for the last 25 years because they believed in it. Every time I've observed the elections, people know that life will perhaps get harder if they continue the Bolivarian revolutionary process. They will face more sanctions, more blockade, inability to access medicine and food, basic necessities, but they defend their sovereignty and independence with every vote and continue to do that today on the streets. So what is our job? What do we do? And I think that also speaks to some questions that are still in the chat about, upholding international law, and is the United Nations functioning when it comes to its ability to defend basic, principles of sovereignty that are enshrined in international law. And we're seeing failing again as it's failed to respond to the genocide by Israel and the United States in Gaza. So I think that's our call to action. That means that people in Canada and the US, we have to go to the streets with more fervor and organization and build, like I said, a united front in defense of Venezuela and tie that with attacks at home and abroad. Today there are demonstrations across the US focusing on Venezuela, on ICE, on Palestine. These are important connections to be making that we can also make here in Canada. So that's what I would end with as a final answer to questions. Janine's posted some links in the chat about the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network. I just wanted to do a final announcement and make sure people know about the Venezuela Solidarity Network, which, as I said, is an organization founded in late 2023 to maintain consistent and coordinated solidarity action with Venezuela. We've been active, especially since January 3rd, but before then as well. And I'm going to post in the chat the social media and website for the Venezuela Solidarity Network, an elections toolkit that we put together after the 2024 elections that has a lot of important statements and writing and reports on the 2024 presidential election to help people in the conversations they're having about that election of President Nicolas Maduro Moros, and also the link to join the Venezuela Solidarity Network if you're representing an organization. I very much encourage you to join in. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you to Allison, and thank you to all our speakers, Andreina, Maria, Camila, and Allison. I think we had such a fantastic, excellent panel of speakers, a lot of education and insights. And as I had posted, this is being live streamed on Facebook, so you can share it, rewatch it, send it to someone there. And also we will be posting on YouTube, so this webinar can continue to be shared and impact more people. So I'll just give everyone a second to copy anything else out of the chat. Allison has just posted the information about the Venezuela Solidarity Network. Also, as I said, if you are organizing an action across Canada in particular, please tag us on social media, DM the social media accounts, or email us at canadapeaceandjustice@gmail.com. And I've also put in the chat ways that you can follow the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network and how you can get involved, how your organization can join the network. So thank you so much to all our speakers, everyone who joined and participated on many different time zones today. And let's keep organizing, let's keep hitting the streets, and let's keep defending Venezuela. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
And if you don't mind, Janine, I'm going to put up some posters for two upcoming events, the Sunday, January 25th International Online Mass Rally, and the call to action for Venezuela that I posted in the chat earlier, just as people copy the links and sign off for tonight. Thank you again to the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network.
Of course. Yeah, important to end a webinar like this with action. So the International Online Mass Rally that is happening this coming Sunday, January 25th, 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern. And then the next one that we have here is the January 23rd to 31st Week of Resistance, Disrupt the U.S. War Machine, Stop the War on Venezuela, ICE out of our communities. So please grab that information, and there's much more that we can continue on from this webinar to action on the streets. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.